I'd like to prelace this video and any future horror game videos with this statement. I'm a fucking wimp when it comes to horror. Films, shows, even stories, I get freaked out about stuff like this, which makes it really strange that I often really enjoy horror games. Now, I'm definitely not an expert in this area, but my gateway into this was the 2010 zombie craze where I became really obsessed with The Walking Dead. And this was back when there was like 6 seasons of it and about 3 seasons of its spin-off, Fear the Walking Dead. Now, Jesus, it doesn't stop and I've pretty much fallen off the show, even though I did make it to season 11. I just need to finish it, don't I? I just can't be Anyway, my obsession with this actually started after playing The Last of Us Remastered for the first time, as this was the first survival horror game I experienced. But as much as I absolutely loved The Last of Us, it didn't make me want to play more horror games, as I knew deep down The Last of Us wasn't actually that scary, comparatively speaking. The franchises that terrified me the most into never trying were Resident Evil and Silent Hill. To this day, I've never played a Silent Hill game, but maybe I'll look to change that soon with the several new announcements for the series. But Resident Evil, I fell in love with. I've played every numbered entry except for 0, and as of now, I'm split between 2 favourites, Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil 4 Remake. I fucking love both of those games. But considering my hesitance to the horror genre, you might be wondering how I got into Resident Evil. Well, that would be thanks to one of my friends convincing me to play Resident Evil Remake on the GameCube, which he had recently beaten.
Yeah, that's right.
Fuck me!
Well, you can thank me later.
How did you get into my house?
Well, I found this here armor key.
You had the... Oh, I see what you did there. Well, you're here now. Want to join me?
Absolutely. Which one are we talking about? Original or remake?
Well, actually, I was going to say both.
Okay, yeah, sure, I can work with that. Let's get on with it then.
It's time for Resident Evil.
Resident Evil, or Biohazard in Japan, was Capcom's killer app for the PlayStation in 1996. Being a huge success both critically and financially, Resident Evil was massively inspired by a previous Capcom game known as Sweet Home, an RPG that attempted to bring the scares to home computers. A lot of elements from this game would inspire how the first Resident Evil would look. Development on Resident Evil would begin in 1993, and during the first 6 months, the game's director, Shinji Mikami, worked alone on the project. Talk about dedication.
It was interesting to learn that at one point, the game was planned to look a little bit more like Doom and go with a first-person perspective. This was obviously dropped very early in development, but considering this idea wouldn't be revisited until Resident Evil 7, it's interesting to think how differently things could have gone if Capcom had stuck with this idea. The choice to use pre-rendered backgrounds and fixed camera angles was to allow for a higher level of detail than fully 3D environments would allow on the PlayStation. And it still looks good. The backgrounds do look amazing, but you can tell that it's aged. The game was released to massive praise from fans and critics alike, and would go on to sell 5 million copies between the multiple releases on the PS1. It's one of the most influential games of all time, and raised the bar for horror games going forward. Now, we're going to go into the story, but I wanted to be clear, we're sort of telling the overall story, which was enhanced by the remake. Some details didn't exist in the original, but in 2023, I think it's a safe bet to say that this is canon. The story of Resident Evil begins with reports of cannibalistic activity in the fictional Arcalay Mountains. The Special Tactics and Rescue Service, or STARS, send their Bravo team in to uncover the cause of the incidents. But after a day, all communication was lost, so the Alpha team is tasked with investigating the disappearance, as well as looking further into the incidents. This team consists of Captain Albert Wesker, the pilot Brad Vickers, then the 4 officers Barry Burton, Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, and Joseph Frost.
Well, you mentioned Joseph Frost as if he's an actual character. Now, there's plenty of useless NPCs throughout this series, but Joseph is probably one of the quickest deaths in any game. A few moments after discovering the crash site of Bravo Team's helicopter, Joseph is ravaged to pieces by a pack of rabid-seeming dogs. All that training for fuck all. Yeah, it had a strong effect on Jill at least. Joseph! And Brad doesn't fare much better. Dude really shows up and folds within minutes, taking the helicopter with him. Bastard. The rest of the group escape into the woods where they take refuge within a nearby mansion. The crew hear a gunshot and find a member of Bravo Team being eaten alive by an undead monster, in a moment that is super iconic and probably pretty shocking for the time. Now at this point, the story will play out depending on who you've picked. Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine. Both sides of the story have moments that are exclusive to that character, so if you want the full picture, you should really play both campaigns.
However, it's not like both stories are canon, as while there are plenty of things that only happen in one character scenario, major story moments play out in both, despite the fact the other protagonist completely disappears until the other finds them towards the end of the game. And I always found this odd. Would it have been too much to ask to have our main cast interact in crucial moments in order to make both stories make sense as a whole? I know a big part of this game's mood is the feeling of being alone in the mansion and discovering the horrors as you go along, but I never liked how both Jill and Chris witness important moments to the stories separately, which literally can't happen twice. it's impossible to put the two stories together as one narrative. So I've always liked to think of it as the stories are simply the events of the game from the perspectives of the characters, similar to how Tails' story would have different dialogue and cutscenes to Sonic's and Sonic Adventure, despite them witnessing the same stuff.
You can't help but bring Sonic into everything, can you?
Have we met?
But I do see what you're saying. If I had to choose a campaign just for its story, I'd choose Jill. Not only is she just a cooler character overall, but she gets to travel around with Barry Burton, who has a lot more screen time than Rebecca Chambers from Chris's scenario, who saves Chris from poisoning True, but then really only exists to play the piano as Chris is incapable. Barry appears to be helping Jill for most of the game, and he's more interesting due to his odd behaviour, causing Jill to raise an eyebrow. It's revealed that he's actually being threatened to cover up all evidence pointing to the real villain, Wesker.
Yeah, Wesker's the bad guy. Of course he is, just look at him.
I realise we're almost totally out of chronological order here, but as we discover from exploring the mansion and its surrounding areas, this whole place is essentially a testing ground for the pharmaceutical company Umbrella, who have an undercover research department studying something known as the progenitor virus. However, this virus broke out in the mansion and transformed many of the people working there into mindless zombies. The mansion was owned by Dr. Spencer, one of Umbrella's founders, who it turns out was using the virus illegally to create bioweapons for the US government. However, in the laboratory, the virus leaked and mutated all the researchers, allowing all the bioweapons to mutate and escape.
The remake introduces the most dangerous mutated creature cutting about, that being Lisa Trevor, a mutated abomination of a little girl who was captured years ago by Umbrella, who planned to experiment on her and her family with the progenitor virus. The story of this family is honestly really tragic. Her father, George Trevor, was well known for creating buildings with intricate designs, so Spencer contracted him to build the mansion with the promise of unlimited funding. However, Spencer then captured his wife and daughter to begin the experiments, telling George that they had simply gone to visit some family. But over time, George learnt too much and ended up trapped in his own mansion after being drugged by the guards, where he died of thirst and starvation in a blocked corridor that concealed a tombstone which had his own name on it. Poor guy, that's not a good way to go.
And his wife Jessica didn't have it much better. She was killed by researchers and buried in a coffin deep underground after trying to escape with Lisa. After she was killed, Umbrella tried to replace her with a fake, but this didn't trick Lisa for long, and she literally ripped off the face of the imposter as she believed she stole it from her mother. Lisa reacted very positively to the testing and became enhanced physically. However, the virus was so strong within her, she actually was able to heal from any wound, meaning Umbrella couldn't really dispose of her. And now all the guards are dead, Lisa Trevor roams free in the grounds of the mansion and has picked up a very unique way of greeting people.
Anyway, we are sort of bouncing all over the place here. Throughout your journey, Jill and Chris will come across members of the STARS Bravo team, who, other than Rebecca, are either dead, mutated, or about to be dead. As we mentioned earlier, Barry was under the thumb of Wesker, who was threatening the safety of Barry's family if he didn't help him in covering up any evidence that points to his or Umbrella's involvement, including the assassination of any remaining Bravo team members, leaving Rebecca as the only survivor. Wesker's involvement is revealed when exploring the lab underneath the mansion, where we find photos of him and Umbrella's team. And it's not long after this that we confront Wesker, who sets his super creation, Tyrant, on us. You see, as well as destroying evidence, the second reason the STARS team was deployed was to test the effectiveness of the bioweapons against military forces, and Tyrant is Wesker's favourite child, it seems.
That's right. This is the ultimate life form, Tyrant. Chris? Stop it.
Now, depending on the scenario, Wesker either gets killed by Tyrant or disappears. Now, canonically, his death is what actually happens, as this would lead to Wesker being enhanced by the virus and coming back to life for future games.
After putting Tyrant down, the self-destruct sequence begins and we rush to save either Chris or Jill and escape. It's weird how Barry and Rebecca only show up if they were in your story, but whatever. We're finally able to get away as Brad's finally finished his Tommy and comes back to save us. But Tyrant isn't done and attacks us during the escape. Luckily, Brad had a spare rocket launcher on him, as you do, and we showed Tyrant the power of the big boomstick. The gang fly away as the mansion explodes, ending Resident Evil. So, what do you reckon of this story?
It's okay. I mean, it really bugs me that both stories don't quite make sense when they're put together, but individually, they're fine. Not amazing, but fine. It sets into motion events that would lead to other, better games in the series, and when it lacks in story, it makes up for in atmosphere. Resident Evil, to this day, still has a creepy vibe that permeates the whole game. From the dog smashing through the window, to the hunter creature coming running towards you in a cutscene after you get back inside the mansion.
Well, Seymour, I made it, despite your directions.
Even the loading screens between rooms, that, no matter how many times I see it, always makes me think that something is going to come jumping out at me.
Are we going to talk about the voice acting?
Do you want to talk about the voice acting?
I'd very much like to talk about the voice acting.
Let's do it then.
How I've done it. Sorry, Jill. Wait.
I'll go and get another rope.
It's me, Chris.
Is that you, Rebecca?
There are terrible demons. Ouch!
Chris? Stop it.
Wesker, you're pitiful.
Perfect. Fucking brilliant. No notes. The voice acting in the original Resident Evil is laughably awful, but it's so bad it's not even close to painful, it's just entertaining. From long awkward pauses, stilted delivery, and just generally bad writing, the game really feels like a shitty horror movie, and to be fair, that's probably what they wanted. Look at this live action opening. These guys have no idea what's going on. But to be fair, Resident Evil isn't supposed to be too stupidly serious, like you can play as a block as tofu in the sequel, you know what I mean.
The remake tones things down dramatically and the performances are significantly better. It's nowhere near as cheesy, and while they aren't like A-class performances, it gets the job done and that's what matters.
It's about time we talk about the game, don't you think?
Shit, yeah, of course, this is a video game after all, and despite our deep dive, the game is like 95% gameplay. Resident Evil is a survival horror game that has you explore and survive the horrors of the Archelay Mansion and its surrounding areas. Now, if you're new to this franchise, you might be surprised to see how much slower and calmer Resident Evil's gameplay is compared to the modern games. This is a franchise that has been all over the place in terms of its pacing, tone, and focus. And that's just within the numbered entries. While the modern games went back to basics with Resident Evil 7, 8 brought back more action and was heavily inspired by the very action-oriented Resident Evil 4, which just got remade. Do you see what I mean by all over the place? This game's main focus is survival horror. It wants to stress you out, make you tense, and constantly requires the player to make crucial choices that can potentially have consequences later down the road. Does it succeed? Somewhat. Look, Resident Evil helped change the landscape in horror games, and the gameplay absolutely still keeps you on your toes at all times. Is the original Resident Evil still scary? No, I don't think so. It has a great atmosphere, and the soundtrack plays a great part in that. But besides a couple of clever jump scares, this game isn't making me shit my pants.
It's not the end of the world though, as the dire situation the characters find themselves in is represented really well in game. The sound effects are great, and documents you can find by exploring can either reveal horrifying secrets or cleverly set the mood for what's to come. Picking between Chris and Jill at the beginning of your adventure will provide you with a different experience. The difference include the types of weapons you can find, the frequency of enemies, and the character's health and inventory space. And if you're playing this for the first time, in the original or the remake, you're picking Jill first. Let's see, Jill has more inventory space, gets some amazing weapons like the grenade launcher, which can just melt through enemies and can be found super early on, and also gets a lockpick, allowing Jill to open certain locked doors and drawers with no issue whatsoever.
Chris doesn't quite have the same luck, especially in the original where he has a big health bar, which is nice I guess, but more enemies appear in his scenario, and with the smaller inventory, it's going to be a struggle to carry around emergency healing. This gets even worse when Chris needs to find and carry small keys around with him just to open doors and drawers that Jill can easily open with the lockpick. And as keys are kept in the same slots as the rest of your items, Chris's inventory fills up fast. He does get some great weapons for sure, but they don't compare to Jill's. In the remake, he does get the lighter, an item which can burn the bodies of incapacitated zombies to ensure they don't get back up, and light this one torch because it's too dark. Chris, you bitch. Jill can also get the lighter, but it's considered an item she has to carry around in both versions. The thing is, the lighter isn't that important. You don't have to burn enemies as you don't have to kill everything, whereas the locked rooms contain important items. Now the remake does make the lighter matter a little more, as zombies you don't burn can come back as Crimson Heads, and they are really aggressive motherfuckers. Still, not enough to make Chris as fun as Jill. He is essentially the hard mode for this game.
That doesn't mean that Chris's playthrough isn't fun though, it's just that Jill's flows better, and because of the lockpick, you're less likely to get stuck or lost.
I mean, when I first played Resident Evil Remake, I picked Chris, and that was the first Resident Evil game I ever played, and I'm still here. It's just when you know how much smoother it can be, it's just a little painful.
In both scenarios, you must navigate your way around the mansion, the courtyard and outhouse, some underground tunnels, and finally a secret Umbrella lab, finding keys, solving puzzles, and avoiding the undead to progress. I say avoiding as it's not the best idea to kill every enemy in sight. While this may make backtracking through rooms easier, it's a great way to end up with no ammo. Ammo is limited in Resident Evil, and while checking your environments may yield some ammo drops, it's still not going to be enough to take out every enemy in your path. It's important to pick and choose your battles in this game, and sometimes, if you can, it might be worth just running past enemies altogether. You have to be careful though, as well the zombies may look pretty stupid, and often they are. If they manage to grab you, it can really hurt. You can see your health in the menu. Green is good, and red is bad, but be careful. There's a particularly big bite from Morbius over here, and you can be down for the count. So it's always a choice of, do I save my ammo and try and squeeze past, or do I take my chances and blow this fucker to Kingdom Come?
That is, assuming you can adjust to the game's controls. It's a PS1 game that uses tank controls, and in the original release, it didn't use the analog stick. The DualShock version did rectify this, but trust me, it doesn't make the control perfect. It's the make or break part of this game. If you can't get down with it, then you probably aren't going to enjoy this one, or any of the original trilogy. There's a reason the remake of 2 and 3 exist. It's to try and make these original games more appealing to a modern audience, because, let's be real, these controls will likely turn many players away. I don't blame you if you can't get on board. This still applies to the remake of RE1. Don't get me wrong, the controls are much better and you can immediately turn 180 degrees, but you're still dealing with tank controls. The game also has fixed camera angles which can mess with your perception of which direction to press, as camera angles will instantly snap depending on your position in the room. I don't find it confusing, it just doesn't do you any favours when the camera suddenly switches during a combat encounter, and sometimes an enemy can swipe you that literally you just can't see. However, we do live in 2023 and not 2002. There is an official workaround. In the Resident Evil Origins collection for modern consoles, there's an option to remove the tank controls and just move freely with the analog stick. It makes the game so fucking easy though, and honestly, I don't like it. This game is filled with cramped rooms and narrow corridors, and this is all built around the tank controls to provide a tense experience. Without that, you can duck and dive pretty much every enemy or hazard. It's great for accessibility, but sort of undermines the game's whole design.
It doesn't stop at the movement though. The combat can be pretty clunky and all, in the original especially. You equip the weapon you want to use in the menu, which for the most part will be some kind of firearm. You do have a knife, but it's an absolute waste of time. It's so awkward to use and does pitiful damage, I normally just stash it. The rest of the weapons depend on your character, but you'll be wielding handguns, shotguns, grenade launchers, magnums. The variety's there for sure, but the more powerful the weapon, the more scarce the ammo will be. So it's best not to blow all of those acid rounds on regular count. To reload weapons, you can either unload your barrel and let it do its thing, or enter the menu and combine the ammo with the gun. It's a bit of a pace breaker, but as the game pauses when you're in the menu, it can often be a great chance to catch your breath in a tight situation. As well as that, the alternative leaves you vulnerable for much longer than is ideal. You can aim 360 degrees and tilt up or down, but the original had no lock-on. Luckily, we're playing the DualShock release, which added lock-on, and of course the remake also has this. You can aim up and try to go for a headshot for an instant kill, but it doesn't feel reliable, and if you misjudge this and get grabbed, you're gonna be taking damage. In the remake, they added flash grenades and smaller knives that can allow you to break free from an enemy, and these are stored separately to the main inventory, so that's a nice update. I love how in the original, after shaking off a zombie, you just kick its head in like...
The combat is fine. Against zombies at least. As soon as you're dealing with mutant dogs, crows, or more evolved bioweapons, it gets awkward fast. Even the lock-on can't make these encounters comfortable, and the boss fights are just a nightmare, whether it's this snake preventing your escape or this spider moving way too fast. The bosses are the one part of this game that feels not very well thought out when it comes to the control. They can move so much faster than you, and with the gunplay being clunky at best, lining up a good shot often takes too long. This fucking snake, oh my god, you can literally get stuck in his body and that's it, there's nothing you can do. He just seasons you with some poison and eats you. For fuck's sake, Chris, jump over it. Other than that, most bosses go down fairly quickly. They're just awkward and can really hurt.
Besides the enemies you face, the other challenges Resident Evil throws at you are puzzles. It's a healthy amount and they can get pretty complex at points. The remake changed many of the puzzles, but they can still be pretty brain taxing. I wouldn't feel too bad about looking up the solutions to some of these. Like the V-Jolt solution, for example. Numbers and science have never been my strong suit, so just looking at this is enough to give me an aneurysm. It's not so bad now I know what I'm doing though. And what's more is this puzzle is entirely optional if you're playing as Jill, offering an alternative should you not want to fight this section's boss outright. However, if you're playing as Chris, he'll get captured here, and you take control of Rebecca again to save his ass.
The biggest puzzle to me is your character's inventory. We've mentioned how Jill and Chris have different inventory sizes and how Chris has a bad time due to his being smaller. However, with both characters, you need to be mindful of what you're carrying and when you're carrying it, as it's very easy to run out of room, find a required item, and need to backtrack to one of the safe rooms to store something. The safe rooms are quiet spaces where you can use the magic item box to store and collect items. You can get any item from any box in normal difficulties, so you don't have to worry about remembering where you left stuff. Still, you'll need to choose whether to take extra healing and ammo with you, or if it's worth picking up a consumable item after finding them. You may find a clip for a handgun, but if you then find some valuable ink ribbons later, but have no room, you'll have to make a round trip. Oh yeah, and ink ribbons? They're how you save the game. Oh yeah, you have limited saves in Resident Evil. A great way of adding more stress to the player's plate, but a nightmare if you need to turn the game off. I'm glad this will be dropped later in the series. You can also free up inventory space by combining certain items. Now, this is pretty bare in Resident Evil 1. Later entries would massively build on this feature, but here you can combine herbs to get some better effects. Green herbs restore health, blue herbs remove poison, and red herbs are useless alone, but can be mixed with a green herb for a full heal. But you can mix a blue and green herb for a heal and a poison cure, multiple green herbs for more healing, you get the picture. It's beneficial to do so in order to maximise the amount of healing done by the limited amount of herbs.
Talking about the remake more in general, it really is the best way to play this game. Massively enhanced by the updated graphics and especially the lighting. You know, for a mansion suffering from a viral outbreak, the lighting in the original is amazing. The local electrician deserves a raise. But in the remake, it's all a lot moodier. The lighting is dim and it sells the dankness of the outskirts of the mansion. The sound effects are used to much better effect here, using scare cards to genuinely get a few jump scares out of me throughout.
The remake adds quite a lot to the adventure, making it bigger overall. There's more rooms in every area, and therefore more things needed to progress. For example, in the first section of the mansion in the original, you had to collect these 4 emblems to leave. However, in the remake, your first task is to collect these 4 masks scattered around. This changes the progression order, so if you've played one version, you may be thrown off going to the other, as it's more different than you may think. But it's a good different. In the remake's favour, I think. It never feels like padding, and the new areas are totally natural additions to the pre-existing ones. When it comes to classic Resident Evil gameplay, I really don't think you can do much better than Resident Evil Remake. It's a tense, compact experience that still delivers the scares 20 years after its release. And while I wouldn't mind an over-the-shoulder remake of this game too, I think there are other Resident Evil games that need the remake treatment more.
Honestly, I love these games. The remake introduced me to the series when I decided to pick it up on the cheap while I had nothing to do over lockdown. And while the old school controls proved to be a bit of a learning curve, I got past this very quickly and found myself struggling to put it down. I'm a sucker for all things horror related as it is, so I'm not surprised the series has wound up being amongst my favourites, the remake in particular being up there with some of the best games I've played. I think it's widely accepted that this rendition of Resident Evil is one of, if not the best remake of all time. Despite a few nitpicks we've mentioned here and there, Remake is pretty much perfect. It'll always be impressive how much video games had evolved in just 5 years, especially when looking at how the games of today compare with that of the last couple of generations. On the basis of another remake then, it's difficult to say as this one nails it so well, but having said that, the series' 30th anniversary is close to the horizon, and I wouldn't be against Capcom revisiting the Spencer Mansion for a further modernised take on the classic, especially as some of the fans of the newer releases could be put off by the aged control scheme. And while they're at it, why not include these previous versions in the package and offer more alternatives of a similar experience?
Like that's ever gonna happen.
So, we done?
Yeah, I think so. You got anything else to add?
Well, when we're doing Crash Team Racing?
Not yet, but we will. Anyway, thanks for joining me. Oh, he's gone. And I guess it's time to get going myself. But where exactly? Well, I'm in the mood for a bit more horror, so next time, why don't we see how the original Silent Hill compares to this game? I guess I'll see you then.